Hello, I am Brighan. I am a freelance illustrator, comic artist, and concept artist from Spain. If you have been subscribed to my channel, as for now, you may be familiar with my work already because I post mostly time lapse here and some demos for my patrons, etc. But it's mostly on the quiet side. So since Clip Studio is on sale, I've decided to do an in-depth video of why you should get Clip Studio because it's the software that I love the most when it comes to work. Like I use this for 99% of what I do. So I'm very, very, very passionate about Clip Studio, and I promise this is not like a commissioned video. This is not an ad. I'm not being paid for this. I'm just very normal and very, 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 very thankful for how Clip Studio has been a game changer for me because the tools are so good. The interface is very friendly once you get used to it. The community is also amazing. So I will always sing their praises. In this video, I'll be covering some introductions to the user interface as well as some of the tools it comes with, some of the things you can do with it, such as illustrations, comics, animation, but I'll keep it mostly friendly for those who are getting introduced to digital art. So some experience is advised, but I keep it simple enough so everyone can hop on the software. First things first, this is the initial interface you will be having whenever you get your license. Some things may differ slightly as I reset my interface to the basics, but again, some things are still. For example, here the toolbar may look different for you. Don't worry, as I'll go to the basic tools, so it's easier for you to understand the many tools that the software has. So if you use other software such as Photoshop or Paint Tools I, which are the most popular amongst those who work in the digital art field, you may notice that the experience with Clip Studio is different, but is still very familiar to some of the easy traits that Paint Tools I has with the post-production filters and other tools that Photoshop gives you. So now that some of these companies, and by these companies I mean Adobe, are getting more into the AI things, I understand that some people are jumping into Clip Studio as an option, which is something that I really recommend because for me, honestly, Clip Studio has been a game changer for many reasons, which I will be explaining in this video. So the very first thing you may want to do is going into your Clip Studio settings in File and Preference. Here you will get this window here that will give you some parameters for the software to work with. This is like, for example, length of key press to switch tools. This may look a little bit technical, and this is mostly following your own tastes and how you work with. But some of the things that I recommend touching around is the, give me a moment. Here in the performance, you can set like how much space you will allow your application to, like, again, this depends on your PC's resources and the processing units you have. If you have a laptop, you may want to set this lower. I personally keep this kind of high, mainly because my PC is good with it. Again, the performance is up to you. But when it comes to the file, here is an important section of the reference that I always recommend checking because it can save you from so many trouble. So one of the things that I always recommend activating is the enable canvas recovery. And I have set mine for 15 minutes. So this means that every 15 minutes, the Clip Studio will save a temporary file of the canvas you're working in. So say if you have a power surge or if you have any issues or the software just crashes, because that's still something that could happen, you will have access to safety safety files that you can get back to. So yeah, I always recommend sending this if it's not activated by default. Then if you want to configure any of the shortcuts, you have to go to File and then go down here to Shortcut Settings. This is also something that you have to configure as you wish, because I use different shortcuts compared to other people. So these may differ from yours. Here you can change from tools to menu commands. If you want to, for example, here in view, can flip horizontal. I have set mine to Control Q, which is a shortcut that most software programs have set as close canvas, which is a command that I don't want to keep personally because accidents may happen and I don't want to happen to me. So for example, I set mine to flip horizontal so I can easily flip the canvas whenever I'm working and mirror it horizontally, if that makes more sense. So the first thing we are gonna do is creating a new file. You have to go to File and click on New. Once you do that, you will get this pop-up to configure your new canvas. Here there are some templates, let's say, for different types of projects. So I usually work on illustration or say illustrations, but if you want to work on webtoons and comics, you have here some extra panels and one for animation. In this video, I will be only covering illustration to keep it more simplified, because these other things may require a more in-depth video and I don't want to overwhelm people with this one. So the first thing you want to here have some templates. These are default templates that you can start with, and here are all my custom ones, because it makes for an easier, faster start. So if you want to do a new one, you just have to, for example, let me pick this basic one and say I want to go with 3000 pixels for 2000 pixels. I'm working here with pixels, as you may notice. I recommend working with pixels unless you want to do a print or a poster or anything that is required to have any specific dimension. So it depends of if you're working in centimeters or in inches. Here you want to keep an eye on that, but otherwise I just go with pixels. The resolution, it also depends of what do you want to do. The default for this custom template that we're working with is 72, which is web use. 72 pixels DPI is named. So 72 is the resolution that internet images have. So it's not made for printing or anything like that. I usually work at 350, or for comics I work with 600, but for now we're gonna keep it at 300. And basic expression color, you can do some stuff here, but I usually again work with color. Paper color will be the base layer which Clip Studio will give you. This will come as white most likely as default in your settings, but I always recommend going to a mid gray so you don't strain your eyes, because you will thank me and your eyes will especially thank you on the long run. And then with more modern versions of Clip Studio, they've introduced record time-lapse. This is something you have to be careful with, especially if you don't have a powerful PC, because recording a time-lapse will take more resources and will make the file bigger. So even though Clip Studio is pretty optimized and they did an extra optimization for how big the files ended up being, just keep an eye on how long you're working on your file, because otherwise you may run through some issues as your PC not being able to open the file on the next day you're working in if it gets too chunky, you know. So since I will cover a little bit of the time-lapse, I'm gonna just keep this record time-lapse on. And then to save this template, you just have to click on this icon here. So click on here, you will get this pop-up, and then preset name. You want to give it a name, I'm gonna say tutorial for the sake of this video. And here you can select the settings that you may want to check. So I'm gonna save this, and since it's not an animation setting, I don't care about this one, so I'm gonna keep it off. And then you click OK, and you have your new canvas. Now that we have our new canvas, we can start explaining and getting into the tools. So the first thing that I struggled with understanding was the Subtool folder. This gap here, this thing here. Because for me, I came from Photoshop and I was like, okay, I have this set of brushes, I have this brush, and I have this list of brushes, but I didn't understand the different tabs that I had here. And if you click on another tool, you will get different tabs. Again, mine are a little bit more complex because I have a lot of brushes, but I'm picking pen just for the sake of showing you. So let me pick black color here from the color wheel. And this one has a big stabilization, so I'm gonna get into that in a moment. So about the subtools, I understand it as folders. So you can customize this, you can reorder your brushes, and then you want to, if you want to keep different sets of brushes separated for easier access, which is the thing that I tend to do, you just need to click on the brush, desired brush, and drag it like so. So now you have another section for these subtools if you want to keep more together, or if you just want to keep this separated. To return it to place, you just have to, or move it elsewhere, you just have to hold it and then drag it there, and say if I want to keep it again all the way up to the list, I just have to do so. Now for tool properties, this is where you customize how the brush behaves. So say I want to lower the stabilization. The stabilization is what improves your pulse for a little bit, because for example here, if you have bad pulse and you're inking, you notice that the line is a little wiggly here, so you can change that with the stabilization, and that means that the software will help you in how soft the curves and the trace will be. To navigate through your canvas, you have different shortcuts. You have, for example, here some navigation tools for zoom in or zoom out. I'm gonna paint something for reference so you can see the difference. Yeah, zoom in and zoom out here. And then you also have rotate and hand to pan through your canvas. Now I might say that this is very inefficient because most people just use the shortcuts. They are easier to use. So for zooming in, you just have to hold Ctrl and the spacebar, and then you click on the canvas and just move your mouse left or right, like so. If you want to pan through your canvas, you just need to hold the spacebar and drag around, so you can navigate this way. And then another shortcut, which is very useful, is if you're painting and you want to change the size of your brush, you can do so with these here, but I personally never use this. So I just need to click on Ctrl and Alt to just press those keys together, and then you move your mouse left and right by clicking on the canvas. So this way you have a very easy and fast access to how big the size of your brush is. You can see it here as well, how it's changing. You can change the settings of your brush in this panel here, but you have also some advanced settings by clicking on this icon here, which will again make this window pop up with a set of many options you have here to customize your brushes. This is something you will get more in depth to once you get familiar with brushes in general, if you don't have that sort of experience. So you can always mingle with this. And if you regret what you've done, you can always reset all settings to default or save all settings as default. If you're not so sure, I just recommend not save settings as default, just in case you screw with your brush in a way that you don't want to. And this is also something you can do from here. So say I in the stabilization and the brush size and the opacity here, and I've done some other things that I don't want to keep, I can always reset the settings to default. Do you want to restore the selected subtool to its default settings? Yeah, okay. And that just restores the brush overall. Now, say once you've worked on your illustration a little bit more, if you haven't saved already, you really should. So for that, you just have to go to File and Save or Save As. This way, you will get a new pop-up and you can save your illustration. Yes. And that's done. Always make sure to save a copy in Clip Studio format before saving in PNG or DP or whatever, because you may want to keep the layers if you're not finished with your work yet. Now I will get into some of the layer properties and some of the things that I use the most whenever I'm working. So whenever I have a sketch done, I use what is called this effect, which is layer color. I use the shortcut Ctrl-B to activate it faster. But if you want to go to its menu, you just have to go to layer property here and then click on this icon here. These will color your entire layer with whichever color you want to work with. I usually work with blue because it's easier for me to see, but you may want to use pink, for example. So what this does is, however you're working with, like whichever tool or whichever color you're working in this layer with, for example, here I'm using black, it's always gonna be filled with this layer color that I said. So here I'm gonna use orange, and it's gonna respect the value, but it will be a shade of pink. No matter what, it's gonna be pink. Say if I want to change it to blue again, it's gonna again respect the values, but it's always gonna be blue unless I deactivate it here, which then will show the real colors that I used. So the way that I use this property tool is this way. I always use it in blue, and then I lower the opacity here, and then I ink on top of this layer, because for me it's easier to see. I tend to also lock the layer in this icon here, so I don't accidentally merge it with the ink, because that's something that happens to most of us whenever you're inking and you accidentally merge it with the layer below, and then your entire sketch and your entire ink layer are messed up for you and you have to redo so much work. So this is a way to avoid that problem from happening. To create new layers, you just have to click on this icon. I usually work with rasterized layer, which is just like simple layers, but you can create vector layers if you're working on something different, for example emotes of comics, because what vector layers do is saving the information about each of your traces, so you can later edit your work like so, which is very, very convenient for, again, graphics such as emotes. But this also is very useful for comics, especially if you want to resize your drawing without it suffering from, let's say, resizing. You can do whatever you want with these, and they come really, really, really in handy for some types of work. Another tool property which is very, very cool is something called border effect here. So if you click on it, you're not gonna notice now because my canvas is completely white. But if I click on edge color, and I pick red, you will see now that I can choose a border effect for my layer. This will apply for everything. And this is very, very useful if you're, for example, drawing a boot. I'm gonna draw a simplified version of one. And you're drawing laces. Here, let me create another layer with the same properties but with white. So if you're drawing some laces, it's very, very useful if you want to save some time. You can just create another one on top of that one and just do this. You can then rasterize this layer and then fix anything you may need to. As if it was a normal layer. Now, one of my favorite tools from Clip Studio, it's bucket. So if you want to color your drawing, you have your line work here. You just need to create another layer for that and now go to the bucket tool. Other softwares don't have that, and this is honestly what sold it to me. So if you want to fill your illustration with color faster, I'm gonna pick my custom brush here and say I want to open a reference here of my Sona. So I can drag this here to a side and then move this border around so I can have it here. I usually work like this. I keep my reference to the left side. You can also hide some of these panels if you want to. I'm gonna keep them open. You can also click on tab to hide the entire interface from the sides, but I rarely do that. This is just an option you can have access to. And I'm gonna click Alt to take a sample of my hair color and go to the bucket as said. So now, instead of filling your entire canvas with the color, you can set your bucket to refer to other layers. So what does this mean? This means that even if you're working on your color layer here, which doesn't have anything else going on, you can just click or drag around and it will keep in mind everything that is happening on your canvas and in other layers, and it will ultimately respect the limits of the ink in my case, because I'm working with simple inks. Now you can adjust some parameters here for the bucket, like close gap. This will make Clip Studio close any potential pixels that you have. Like here everything is closed, but if I were to have space like so here that I didn't finish closing, if I set this to the maximum, that will mean that Clip Studio will close that one for me. Like so. This is basically the tolerance that you're telling Clip Studio to have. The lower the close gap, the less tolerance it will have. So it's more likely that it's going to mess up like this. Here is also the tolerance, which again, like this is, sets the range of color considering as the same color. This means basically kind of the same. It depends of your canvas. I usually don't mingle with this. I just work with close gap. But again, this is my own experience. Then here, refer to multiple. This means all layers, but you can set a reference layer. So since now I'm just working with the ink, I could also set it as a reference layer, and it will only take this layer as into consideration for the borders. Here you can see that there are some dead pixels behind my line work and here. So another way to fix that is area sculpting. I usually just mingle with this, but this means that every time I use the bucket, it will bleed out by 5 pixels. So if I want the bucket to fill more pixels. I just need to heighten that up. And now you see that it is going over my line work just a little bit, but for example, it is covering these strokes here. So maybe if I go a little bit lower, yeah, that looks pretty decent. Another tool that you can use in the bucket for any extra areas that you may want to fill if you don't want to use the brush, you know, like small pixels you want to cover, you can use paint non-filled area. Again, my program is using some Spanglish because my settings are in English, but some tools haven't translated to English, so just keep the reference in mind for the icon and the trace. So this is kind of like a brush, but these will allow you to fill some spaces here and there. You just need to cover anything that the bucket would have missed. And resculpt. This again behaves just like a normal brush. It's not perfect though, but it definitely saves a lot of time. I worked as a colorant assistant and I would use the bucket with refer order layers and paint non-filled area all the time. If you want to color anything inside your layer, you can always use a clipping mask like here, creating one new layer, and then click the layer below. You will see that it has like a salmon bar going on here, and that will make that layer not go over the base one, so it will respect the limits and everything that it's covering. The base layer is covering. If you don't want to work on a separate layer, you can always use log alpha here, and that will basically work the same, but this depends of your preference. If you want to keep the information on a separate layer, just use a mask. And then if you don't care and just want to add, for example, like a small gradient here for the tips of the hair, like I don't need that information to be in a separate layer. Maybe I just want to add a gradient here, and I know that I won't care if that information is fused here. I will only use the log alpha mode. There are many ways to select things around your canvas, like for example the wand tool, which is here. Here you can set different settings for how do you want it to behave. You can pick select only from editing layer to select, which means it will only pick things from the layer I'm working in, or select refer to other layers, which will behave in a similar way as the bucket from this explanation that I gave before. If you want to pick a specific color from the canvas, say I want to add some gradients and some things to my skin tone here, you can always go to select and then select color gamut. I usually work with 8. This is the tolerance that your selection will have. Again, this you can go lower if you want a specific color, or raising this up for a better tolerance. So since we have some gradients here, I'm gonna pick my purple here. So it's just getting those tones which are more similar to each other, but if I go upwards, it's gonna pick more of that purple color. But now, since I only want to pick my skin, it's gonna keep this at 8, and it's gonna select both this color from the ear and this color from the chest. Something that I also tend to do is hide the selection. Now, to do that, you have to go to View and Selection Border. So this way, you won't have those sort of ants running through your screen. You can undo this by picking again Selection Border. So for this, I'm gonna pick my airbrush here. I'm gonna pick my color and just pick a lighter tone for this area and a warmer tone for this area. Now we can invert the area here or deselect. There are many things you can do with this bar. You can move it around for convenience. And you can also customize it by right-clicking, and this way you can customize and add as many shortcuts as you may want to. I have a few here. You can also put them, say, in some folders here. But these are the ones that I work with. One thing you can do on Clip Studio is using your Liquify tool in several layers at the same time. So if I want to correct this node here, I just need to pick my ink layer and then hold Control, pick my colors as well, and just move things around, which make things way more easier for me to correct things if I wanted to. Just gonna make the snout a little bit longer and maybe give myself a little bit of a bigger forehead here. This way. Now you just need to go back to the color and keep working on it. Now, one of the new features that Clip Studio has added to their more recent versions is perceptual color mixing, which is what I'm gonna explain next. So you may have noticed that a lot of softwares, when you are trying to mix two different colors, such as, let's say, blue and yellow, if you try to mix them up, it doesn't really feel natural, and sometimes you will get like something barely in between, but it will tend to get a little bit grayer or lose saturation. So now Clip Studio has this amazing feature, which is mixing mode. You can set this to perceptual. I'm gonna keep it a standard for now, just to there are two blobs here. And once I click on perceptual, I'm gonna heighten the smear here, so it's a little bit easier for me to mix them. You may have noticed that now the green is way more natural and much more believable. And if I were to, say, add purple here, use perceptual again, it will create way more balances in between the colors and keep your colors way more harmonized. This comes really in handy when you're working on more complex and rendered illustrations, in which you really need that plastic, natural feeling to how the colors behave. Another very powerful tool is the 3D engine that Clip Studio comes with. So one of the newer features that they added is custom heads. So if you were to pick any of the default heads here, you can customize them and save them as your own if you have different characters, such as these that I kept here for two of my characters, just so you have easier access to whenever you want to draw them in a specific angle. So if you want to create your own head, you just have to go to the settings here, and I keep this aside. Here you can merge different head types with your own. If you want to go for stronger features such as these, or more general masculine ones, here there is a very old, or he looked like a corpse kind of. So if you want to go for a more cadaveric look, you can softly mix these two. Maybe you want to merge different ones for, let's say, chibier one. You would want to do something like this, you can totally make it, and then you can further customize specific features such as the height, the rotation. If you want to give it a little bit of a sadder expression, how deep the sockets are, and then same for all the different features. If you're happy with your custom face and if you want to save it for the next time you're working, you can save the 3D head model to the material palette by clicking on here. I'm gonna call this one Little Guy, and then you can save it on any of your folders here. I tend to save mine in 3D and head. So once you do that, you will get your little guy to go with and move it around. Maybe they are friends now. So when you're working with a head, you can also configure how the light is impacting on that said 3D object. So here you can change the directional color by clicking on this sphere and dragging along until you're happy. Then you can quickly change the color of the light by clicking on this square here and the intensity of it. You can also add an ambient color if you want to go with a colder piece, or if the ambient color is colder, for example here, or maybe you want to go for something warmer, it will also affect to the base color of the model. Clip Studio 3 also comes with an enhanced 3D model system, so whenever you're working with 3D models, you can further customize it, kind of like the same way you can do with it. So that means that if you pick here your little guy, you can then go to the settings and further customize the body type as desired. For example, say if I wanted a thicker torso or a longer torso, I just need to pick here each part of the body and customize it to my tastes. You can also pose your characters as desired if you have any specific pose in mind. And you can also change the poses from the pose directory. Some of these are also downloadable, so you can easily change them as desired. Another thing that I think is very cool from this posing system is that if you go to hand pose, you can set some base poses here, but editing them with this cool triangle here. You can also lock any fingers if you want to keep them locked, or just reset them by doing this again. However, if you have any camera, there is another thing you can do to capture any specific pose if you don't have access to like the reference you're looking for. So you can activate this, import a hand pose in real time from the camera. So say you can see that Clip Studio now is reading my hand motion. I can apply it to the left hand instead. And it will not be perfect, but however, it will do an amazing job at getting that pose you're looking for. With Clip Studio 3, it also comes this upgraded information tab, which will be showing you in real time the system and application memory workload. So as you can see here from my task manager, this goes pretty well with what's going on in here, which will allow you to keep track of your resources, but also keep track of your work time. So I've opened this illustration, which has taken me 10 hours and 47 minutes. This is especially important for those of you who work on commissions, so this will allow you to keep more track of how much time anything takes you. If you're someone who does comics, you may want to know that Clip Studio 3 has now also an improved text system, which means that now you don't need to struggle as much with the lettering, because you can add now text objects such as these. Text. So now if you want to adjust it to a specific area in your panel, you can easily do so by clicking on any of the corners and drawing a line. Once you're happy with it, you can just simply add your bubble in this spline. Aside from which version of Clip Studio you're using, I highly recommend customizing your command bar settings here by right-clicking on it and then adding as many shortcuts as you want to. Again, it will look different on your side, especially if you're just got your Clip Studio code. So here you can see that I have a couple of keys, and I will be explaining to you for which one does which thing. So for example, I have here one for a new file, so I can easily start a new illustration here. This is if I wanted to say copy any of the image here from Clip Studio's official site or any other reference that I may want to use. I'm gonna copy this illustration from Clip Studio assets since I'm gonna show it in a moment. And now this icon, you may see that this icon has just turned on. This is create new from clipboard. I use this for getting reference just by copying any picture that I may want to use as a reference. This will just create a new whole canvas, but with the image you've copied. And you have open to open any new files you may want to work with. Save, there's here close window. I never use this one, honestly. Then export in JPG, export in PNG. Then this is one that I use a lot most of the time, which is show, hide, title bar, and menu bar. So if I click here once, it will hide the very top row of the interface, and if I click again, it will hide the secondary tab. And if I want to see them again, I just have to click a third time. This is very handy if you want to have as much space as possible. I personally do, so I tend to work with both of them hidden, as I have a lot of the things that I use from these panels already added here. This is for flipping horizontally. I personally use the shortcut most of the time, but sometimes you're just mingling here, and this is just for an easier click. And you have change image resolution, and then change canvas resolution. Well, change canvas size, sorry. So this is if you want to say make this narrower. You can also set your reference point if you want to cut from a specific side, or reset. I'm gonna reset because I don't want to do that now. And then you will see that these icons are the same, right? So the difference here is that these 4 shortcuts that I have here work in the layer that I have selected. So say this is for brightness and contrast. Oop. And this is affecting my entire color here, right? And so this is for hue, saturation, and luminosity. And if I click on OK, this is very Halloween-like. You will see that this is now as like the result of what I've just done. And this is for gradient maps. So this is depending on if you use gradient maps. I can get to that in another video. But if I were to pick this one, this is still now the result of what I've just done. However, if you go to layer and new correction layer, this will create a correction layer. So these shortcuts are the same as these, but as a new layer. So I'm gonna explain to you. New brightness contrast layer. So if I were to do this, this is creating a single layer, which will be doing the job of what I've just done. So it's more visually obvious. I'm gonna do that Halloween version. This is now working as a control layer, but working as the hue and contrast and luminosity adjustment layer. So sometimes if I need a little adjustment, I just work with the regular editing tools. But sometimes I want to keep more control, or maybe clipping this thing just to make sure that it's only working in what I have picked here, the layer below. And imagine, let me just do something else that is more visually obvious. So yeah, okay, this one is making my line work, which is only black, is making it white. But if I were to apply the same effect as a new gradient layer map, this is now working on the whole canvas. But if I were to clip it here, it's doing the same thing. If I were to clip it below, it's only working on the layer below. So correction layers are one of my favorite things in the world, honestly. Then I have Gaussian blur. Let me just merge these two real quick to show you. If I wanted to blur this out, I have a shortcut there. Okay, give me a moment. I have convert brightness to opacity, which I use mainly for the following. If I am working on another layer, I'm gonna undo here real quick. Say I want to draw some lasers here. And then I go to layer properties and I add those edges that I showed you before. Then I click on rasterize. And then I click on Control Invert. And now say that I just want this outline. If I do that, I'm gonna turn the lightest values to transparent. So I use black and white layers most of the time for these, but you can use these for a plethora of things. I have a shortcut for export time lapse, which I'll get into in a moment. Then I have show border of selected area. You'll say I want to hide and show these faster because I tend to select a lot of the colors on my illustrations and this border kind of bothers me visually, so I like to keep that hidden, and sometimes I forget exactly what I have picked, so I just turn it on and off at convenience. Then here I have a new window. If I want to move these to another monitor, if you don't have another monitor, you can just put this aside or next to your canvas to take a moment and put it below if you like to work very zoom in but still want to keep an eye on what you're doing. So I'm gonna show you that this updates live so you can keep working on it and keep your brain focused on the whole picture instead. Yeah, pick a screen color is if you want to pick any specific color from the screen or any other monitor if you have any. And these two shortcuts are for post-rendering. So once I have an illustration that I'm happy with and I'm like, okay, I'm finished, say I'm gonna merge visible layers to new layer so I can have a copy of my illustration here. This is another feature that has come with Clip Studio 3. So chromatic aberration. I love chromatic aberration so much. So if I wanted to add chromatic aberration, I have a shortcut specifically for this effect in here. I'm gonna make it a little bit more intense. There we go. And then you can also customize where the radius will be and how it will behave. It's working laterally for a funkier effect. The angle here as well. And then I have one for noise. I always add a noise filter on top of my illustration just to give it a little bit of more texture. And also so it's harder for people to overpaint my signature from illustration. So I always make a copy as I've done here with merge visible to new layer. And then I use this layer with the noise filter. It depends, overlay, soft light. I tend to use overlay and then lower the opacity to 13%, 11%, 20%. It really depends. You can see there is. There we go. You can see it a little bit better now. But it adds some texture to it that I really, really like. And to customize your command bar, you just have to navigate through any option you may want to add. For example, since we were talking about layers, I'm gonna add new correction layer and say that I want a color balance here. Oh, I have it added already. Never mind, let me add another one. Say new correction layer, level correction maybe. Yeah, there we go. You can see now that the icon is showing here. Then maybe you want to add a background color, just like I did here, to differentiate these from these. So you click on settings. You can change the icon here. I like this one, but maybe I want to add purple, like this one. And then click OK. And you see that now it has a very different tone, which will make it easier to spot. I have this one green for chromatic aberration just because I tend to think of the color green for that. Now, one of the very, very most important things and one of the most powerful resources Clip Studio has is Clip Studio Assets. Clip Studio Assets is a website in which any user, including there are some assets which are official, but any Clip Studio user can create a custom brush and submit it to Clip Studio Assets for everyone to download. Some of them are not free. They will either cost gold or Clippy points. I won't talk about the economy here right now, but most of them are free, which is like very, very cool. So I am opening here Clip Studio Assets. This is the main website, and you will see that some of them, let me set this to English. Whoop. Well, anyway, I think you can get the gist of it. But here you can see the news section, top free and top paid. But if you go to, let's say, go to top free, you can see here there daily, weekly, monthly, and then free or pay with points, gold or Clippy. I'm gonna keep here in free. And I have this one already selected for these examples, so you can see how to import assets to Clip Studio. So you have to click here on download. Here I'm clicking on downloading again because I already have it. So you will get the Clip Studio screen popping up here as a result of it. So once it's downloaded, you have to go to Window and then Material. And it depends, sometimes the download folder will appear here, sometimes it won't. But you can click on any of the tabs here, and then you can go to download from here. So once you have your brush download, and whenever you spot it, I know these brushes are from the asset that I just downloaded. So if you want to use them, you just have to go to your desired subtool. I'm gonna be picking this one, and then you just have to drag them like so, and they are already easy and ready to use. So I'm gonna use these blue ones, and that's how you import an asset. There is a lot of different assets that you can use, like such as auto actions, materials, images, 3D models. The website is full of resources, so I really recommend you take an eye on it. I will be also exporting some gradients so you can see how to import them because they are a little bit trickier. So now I have these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful gradients that I want to have in my inventory, so I just have to download them. I'm gonna wait for the data transfer. Now it's synchronizing here, so I'm gonna stop it because it's gonna take a while otherwise. And I'm gonna start downloading it. Right, it's already downloaded, so now I can close these tabs. Now I'm going to download. It has upgraded. And now I just need to go to any gradient tab. Click on Add Gradient Set. And here you can filter your materials, but the default is gonna be materials not added because you're looking to add a new gradient. So Clipper Studio is gonna be like, okay, you don't have it imported, so I'm gonna filter that for you. You can see here Cartoon Sky. Just need to click on Add, and that's gonna add automatically the gradient set that I just got. If you really keep in mind, or you're worried to use the configuration of your Clipper Studio, say your interface or any of your materials, or how you configure them, you can also rely on Clipper Studio's cloud system. So you will have 10 gigabytes of space, which I'm using 2 because I keep my files saved in another cloud because I work with a lot of files and they are very chunky. So I keep this cloud specifically for my configuration and those files that I want to work in my partner's tablet because I own 2 licenses. So I have the dual license, or one is for my PC and another one is for my tablet. So the cloud comes really in handy when I want to export any of the files and use it on my tablet instead and keep them synchronized. So I can then go back to my PC and keep working on it later. Now, here the cloud settings will depend of your preferences. I have synchronized works when starting up, logging in, and shutting down. I have it off just because I rely on another system. But then I have the materials and the application settings on. So whenever I launch this Clipper Studio client, they will synchronize. This allows me to not worry so much about it and not having to remember to do a specific save anytime I have new brushes and the like. And then also include fonts in app settings backup, especially if you work with comics or webtoons or anything like that. This is a lifesaver, honestly. So here you see restore app settings and the latest update, which for me has been 3 days ago. Now it's synchronizing here, as you can see. Here it says that there is no updates for materials, but then it is updating. Probably it's gonna update the brushes that I showed you before. And yeah, backup settings now. If you want to specifically make a backup, just imported any tools. And here is a little bit of more in-depth tutorial from Clipper Studio. Also, Brighan from the future here. I almost forgot to cover the time-lapse section, so I'm gonna cover that real quick right now. So to export a time-lapse, you just have to go to File, Time-lapse, and Export Time-lapse. You can see that I have it activated here, and it's also on in this icon here. Just go to Export Time-lapse, get my window here, and then here you can configure the length of your video. Sometimes for social media you may want to keep it at 60 seconds because it's time limited. So I'm gonna export it as all, and the size, I like to keep it at maximum size for me. And then aspect ratio, I usually don't change this, so it keeps the same resolution and ratio as your canvas size. And then you can here activate a Clipper Studio Paint logo. I personally just don't turn this on. I just add my custom watermark, which is this one. This is my signature. It's gonna show here. It's a little bit small, so I may zoom in when I edit this. But yeah, you can customize here your signature or your watermark, for the placement, for the size. I like to keep mine simple enough here. You can also the blending mode. Sometimes I use multiply, sometimes I use add glow, depends on how bright the canvas is. And then you can also activate tiling if you want this more aggressive style for your video. you're concerned about reposting and the like, you can also mingle with that. I usually don't tile it, I just keep it here in a corner. And you go click OK, and then you click OK again. Oop. There we go. Now you just have to wait a little bit, and once it's finished, you will get a file. I'm gonna show you some of my files while this sports. Depending on how big your file is, it may take a little bit. So here is an example of another previous time lapse that I got from a commission. And this is the speed that it will be playing as. This is exported as the full length of the video. So I didn't set it for 1 minute long or 30 1 minute long or 30 seconds long. This is showing the full process of it. It's still gonna be sped up, you cannot control that. But I mean, it's a very, very handy tool that you have access to with Clip Studio. Now, something that I really recommend once you have exported your time lapse here, I'm gonna wait just a little bit for it to finish. Of course, the longer you've been working on a file, the longer the exporting time will be. So now that we have this, it's gonna ask us where do we want this to save. And I'm gonna say retouched. This is page 14 for my comic. I click on save. And now that we have this time lapse saved, oh, it's another folder. A second. This one. So now we can see it here. So what I really recommend is, I'm not gonna do it in this canvas because I still want to keep recording. But once you've exported your time lapse, say imagine that I'm exporting this, I do recommend to deactivate record time lapse. This action cannot be undone, so make sure that you've correctly saved your time lapse first before doing this. This is just so you can delete and turn off and then save your file. So you have the video on one side and your CSP file on the other, and save a storage, because otherwise this file, once I export this video, I will deactivate the time lapse and this file would get lighter. But once only when I have the video exported. This is very important because this way you can save a storage. But I cannot stress enough, make sure that you saved your video properly, because the action cannot be undone. That said, I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial from the future. I think this is mostly what I wanted to cover about Clip Studio and Clip Studio 3 specifically. So I will be leaving some links below for any useful resources. I have a website in which I have gathered a couple of a handful of useful assets, and also a few of my registered workspace. So this is how I work most of the time, because it allows me to work. I'm also right-handed, so I like to have everything here on the right side, especially if I'm working in complex things, and then just have these optional tab for materials if I need to use any of them, especially image materials, which I just need to insert to in my comics, etc. So if you have any questions, you can comment them below, and I may consider doing another tutorial. This is kind of like simplified, and I hope it comes as understandable enough for those of you who have less experience with Clip Studio. Hope that this has helped you, or maybe make you consider Clip Studio, since right now there is a sale going on, so you can have your Perceptual license for around $22, which is like 21 euros if you're in the European Union, which is a very, very, very cheap price for such a powerful software and it's just one payment, you know, so you're not subscribed. My license though, I use a yearly plan for 2 license, but because I make a lot of use of it, and I also use the X version. For this video, I've specifically used a Perceptual license TV Studio Pro version 3, just for the sake of this tutorial. So if you're considering it, I will start with the Pro version, and if you are maybe wondering or considering any of the extra features that come with X, then I would consider upgrading. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful to you, and I will see you in the next video or time lapse. Bye bye!